My name is Dexter Grant, and until 3 months ago, I believed there wasn't a single object in this world I couldn't buy, store, understand, or control. I built my reputation and my ego on it. My mansion sits on the cliffs above Monterey Bay, a glass and stone fortress overlooking the ocean, filled with items that museums had begged me to loan back. A Roman legionnaire's shield with impact scars, a clay tablet from Uruk with fingerprints older than empires, a ceremonial Aztec knife still stained dark at the edge. Scholars hated me, curators resented me, collectors wanted to be me. I loved that. I told myself I was preserving history, even as I locked priceless artifacts in bulletproof glass and lit them with motion-triggered halogen displays, showing them off at parties where half my guests didn't even know what century they came from. Everything in my collection was curated to feed one thing: my own importance. So, when I first heard about the Crimson Samurai armor, I didn't hesitate. It came to me as a rumor whispered at a private auction in Dubai. Something spoken behind cupped hands, the way men speak of forbidden weapons or lost governments. A multi-billionaire from Kyoto mentioned it over sake, leaning in close, saying, "If you want something truly unique, Grant, there's a suit of armor no museum will touch." It belonged to a warlord whose name was banned from the tongue. Some say an Oni lives inside it. I laughed. I actually laughed in his face. Demons, spirits, superstitions? Please, spare me from this nonsense. But later that night, alone in my hotel room, I couldn't stop thinking about it. A piece of armor so feared that no institution dared to show it? No museum had the courage to acquire it? Perfect. It belonged with me. I pulled strings through channels I'm not proud of. Underground brokers, black market dealers, collectors who specialized in unacquirable relics. One of them finally delivered a name: Kanzawa Yoru, a disgraced historian and artifact intermediary living in Osaka. A man who refused to handle anything without wearing gloves. A man who only met after dusk. A man who required explicitly that we never speak about the armor over recorded lines. I flew to Japan the next day. Yoru looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. His hands shook as he handed me a single photograph. Glossy, grainy, taken decades ago. A blood-red suit of Sengoku-era armor, lacquered so heavily it seemed almost wet. Curved horns swept back from the helmet, and a demon's face was carved into the mask's snarl. I smiled like a child shown a new toy. Yoru did not. "Some armor belonged to demons, not men," he whispered, looking over his shoulder. "This one belonged to Akuma Jinsai, the devil warlord. He slaughtered monks, defiled shrines, practiced rites we do not speak of. After he fell, the gods sealed his wrath in that armor. It is not an artifact. It is a prison." I told him I'd pay double. He refused. I paid triple. He begged me to rethink it. I ignored him. He gave me the armor anyway. Wrapped in heavy black cloth, bound with rope that looked hand-twisted and brittle with age. Along with it came a folded parchment sealed with wax and inked with symbols I couldn't recognize. "Do not break the rules," he said, pressing the parchment into my palm. "If you cannot honor them, at least honor your own life." I didn't open it until I was already back home in my private museum room, surrounded by all my treasures, exhilarated like a child unwrapping a forbidden gift. The rules were handwritten in dark ink, each stroke deliberate, almost carved into the paper. Rule 1. Do not look directly into the helmet after midnight. Rule 2. Never clean the armor with water, you will wake what sleeps. Rule 3. Do not let the armor face a mirror. Rule 4. If you hear the war drum, leave the room immediately. Rule 5. Never put on any single piece of the armor, not even the gauntlet. Rule 6. If the armor whispers your name, do not answer. I snorted. Superstitious nonsense. I had broken rules from governments and private dealers. Why would I care about this? I placed the crimson armor on a custom oak stand in the center of my artifact room. Spotlights illuminated it from every angle, turning the lacquer into a blood-like shine. The horns cast long, wicked shadows across the glass floor tiles. I felt triumphant, victorious, untouchable. Looking back, I should have noticed how cold the air became in the room the moment I released the ropes, or how the helmet seemed to shift a fraction of an inch, as if turning toward me. But I didn't believe in ghosts or demons. I believed in myself, my wealth, my knowledge. At that moment, I didn't know the Oni was already awake. I spent the entire afternoon studying the armor like a man falling in love. The crimson lacquer shimmered under my display lights like wet blood. Every curve, every plate, every rivet held centuries of violence and craftsmanship. The horns sweeping back from the Kabuto helmet were long and sharp, lacquered to the point of reflecting even the faintest gleam. The Menpo mask, carved into a snarling expression, showed intricate teeth etched into the steel. Whoever wore it wanted to be seen as a demon even before becoming one. A collector like me recognizes quality instantly, but this armor, it was different. The lacquer appeared layered in uneven strokes, as if whoever painted it had done so while the armor was still warm. The shoulder guards bore faint claw-like scrapes, not from battle but from something sharper, ritualistic, intentional. Even the smell was strange. Old iron, incense, and a faint charred scent, like burnt cedar. I ran my fingers along the arm plates, marveling at the texture. This wasn't just armor. This was history dipped in blood. My favorite piece was the helmet. The steel was thick, heavier than any kabuto I'd ever handled. The horns seemed fused, not attached, almost grown from the metal. When I held it under the bright gallery lights, the mask's eye slits reflected red, though nothing in the room should have cast such a color. I told myself it was the lacquer, but something about those eyes felt deeper than paint. By midnight, I was exhausted and satisfied, the perfect state for sleeping like a king after a day of triumph. I left the armor illuminated in the center of my room with Japanese artifacts, turned off the hallway lights, and went to bed, feeling completely untouchable. Sleep came quickly, but at 2:43 a.m., something pulled me violently out of my dreams. Metal clanking, slow and dragging. It echoed through the mansion's halls. Steady, rhythmic, unmistakable. I sat up, heart pounding, listening. It didn't sound like something falling or like an object tipping over, more like something walking. Before I could fully process the sound, loud, frantic knocking slammed against my bedroom door. "Mr. Grant, sir." The voice trembled. It was Harold, my night guard, a large man, usually unshakable. I opened the door to find him pale, sweating, clutching the radio against his chest as if expecting it to be torn away. "What is it?" I asked sharply. He swallowed. "There was a noise in the east wing, sir, in the Japanese artifact room. I went to check and..." He hesitated, eyes wide. His voice cracked. "The armor wasn't where you left it." I stared at him. "What?" It wasn't on the stand," he stammered. "It was facing the window, and the mask was turned down, like it was looking at something on the floor. When I blinked, I swear it was closer to me." The hallway felt colder suddenly. My jaw tightened. My annoyance overpowered my unease. Or maybe that's just how I justify my stupidity now. "Show me." Harold flinched. "Sir, I don't." "Now," I snapped. We walked through the corridor, but Harold wouldn't stop glancing over his shoulder, clutching his flashlight like a talisman. The moment we reached the artifact room, he hesitated again, as if expecting something horrific to be waiting. I pushed past him and opened the door. The lights flicked on, and everything looked completely normal. The armor stood on its oak stand exactly where I positioned it, facing the same direction, not an inch out of place. "See?" I said, spreading my arms. "Perfectly intact. Exactly where I left it." Harold shook his head violently. "No, sir. No, it was by the window. I swear on my life it was by the window. The mask was, I don't know, different." "So you're hallucinating," I said sharply. "Or you're pulling some stunt to get attention. Either way, cut it out. I don't tolerate incompetence." He opened his mouth to protest, but I stepped closer. "Repeat something like this again," I said, lowering my voice, "and I will deduct it from your salary." "Understood." Harold froze, then nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." Good. Now get back to your post." He left quickly, still shaking. I remained in the room for a few minutes, glaring at the armor as if expecting it to twitch. It didn't. It simply sat there, silent, gleaming, majestic. I picked up the helmet, inspecting it again. Flawless, still warm to the touch. I didn't notice, not until I sat it back down, that its mask's mouth was curled slightly upward this time, as if amused, but I convinced myself I imagined it. When I went back to bed, I couldn't sleep. Not after the artifact room lights suddenly clicked off by themselves. Not after I heard the soft, unmistakable sound of metal plates shifting in the dark. And certainly not after something whispered in the hallway. So faint I couldn't tell if it was words or breath. The rules sat folded on my nightstand. I hadn't even bothered to reread them, but the first line echoed in my mind anyway. "Do not look directly into the helmet after midnight." I didn't believe in rules then. That was the second stupidest mistake I ever made. The first was buying the armor. By sunrise, I had almost convinced myself the entire event was nothing more than Harold's nerves and my own exhaustion. Sleep deprivation magnifies shadows after all, and exhaustion can make a man hear things. Still, the sound of metal shifting in the dark stuck with me like a thorn under the skin. When the house staff arrived and the morning lights warmed the gallery halls, I made a decision I thought would settle everything. I would check the security footage. My mansion has one of the most advanced surveillance networks money can buy. 44 cameras, thermal options, redundant power sources, local and cloud backups. If anything had moved that night, even a millimeter, I expected to see it. I logged into the system from my study, sipping coffee strong enough to scrape paint off walls. I rewound to 2:40 a.m. camera 12, the Japanese artifact room. Everything looked normal. Then, 2:41 a.m. Harold entered, flashlight shaking, and the feed cut out. No static, no glitch, no pixel distortion. Just a dead black screen. A note flashed in the corner, blinking. Signal lost. I frowned. The system wasn't supposed to do that. I fast-forwarded. 2:43 a.m. 2:44 a.m. Still dead. Black. 2:45 a.m. The exact moment Harold and I walked into the room. The feed returned instantly, perfectly clear. Back to normal. Nothing in between. No corrupted frames. No damage notifications. No evidence the armor had moved. Just a clean slice of time gone. I leaned back, hands steepled under my chin. Coincidence, it had to be. A hardware error at the same moment a guard thought the armor moved? Unlikely, yes, but not impossible. Maybe Harold bumped something. Maybe he panicked and triggered a short. Maybe the system glitched. I repeated those explanations mentally like a mantra. Still, the timing was surgical, too precise, too clean. A rational man would have called a technician. A paranoid man would have thrown the armor out of his house. But I was neither. I was Dexter Grant, the man who dismissed superstitions, rules, warnings, and entire cultural belief systems, because I thought myself immune to all of them. So, I shrugged it off and closed the laptop. Strange coincidences happen, even in mansions filled with ancient cursed antiques. Around lunchtime, I walked through the central hall, mentally reviewing a shipment arriving next week. 2 Sumerian tablets from a private dig, a spearhead taken from a Viking burial mound, and an obsidian idol from Guatemala that everyone insisted wasn't safe for display. Safe, dangerous, haunted. The words never meant anything to me. I was halfway to the kitchen when I felt warm breath against my left ear. Not a breeze, not a draft, not the HVAC kicking on. This was breathing. Slow, heavy, almost animalistic. I froze. Every hair on my neck stood on end. My chest locked, muscles tightening as if preparing for impact. The breath came again, and this time closer. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing. Empty hallway, sunlight streaming through tall windows. A vase on its pedestal, a framed tapestry. Nothing else. But the air where I stood felt wrong. Warmer than the rest of the hall, as if someone had been inches away from my skin just moments before. I swallowed hard, forced a laugh that sounded brittle even to my own ears. Stress? overwork, suggestion. The mind playing tricks. That's what I told myself. But as I turned away, my eye caught a faint reflection in the glass of a display case. Something tall and horned, standing behind me. I whipped around again. The hallway was empty. Only the faintest echo of that warm breath lingered against my cheek. A sliver of fear crawled beneath my confidence. Not enough to panic, not enough to admit anything supernatural. Just enough that I avoided walking past the Japanese artifact room for the rest of the afternoon. But deep down, embarrassingly deep, a small part of me wondered, what if the armor wasn't just an artifact? What if it was something alive, restless, and aware? I pushed the thought into the back of my mind, where it gnawed at me quietly like a starving animal. It was the first time I felt genuinely unsettled in my own home, and it was far from the last. The next morning, I was in my study cataloging a newly acquired Qing dynasty scroll when Maribel, my housemaid of nearly 4 years, approached the doorway with her hands trembling so violently she had to clasp them together to hide it. "Mr. Grant, I need to speak with you," she said, voice thin, brittle. I gestured impatiently. "Well, what is it?" She swallowed. "I'm quitting." I blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "Quitting? Why on earth would you quit?" "I pay you double the market rate and provide housing." Her eyes flicked toward the hall leading to the artifact's wing. But deep down, embarrassingly deep, a small part of me wondered, what if the armor wasn't just an artifact? What if it was something alive, restless, and aware? I pushed the thought into the back of my mind, where it gnawed at me quietly like a starving animal. It was the first time I felt genuinely unsettled in my own home, and it was far from the last. The next morning, I was in my study cataloging a newly acquired Qing dynasty scroll when Maribel, my housemaid of nearly 4 years, approached the doorway with her hands trembling so violently she had to clasp them together to hide it. "Mr. Grant, I need to speak with you," she said, voice thin, brittle. I gestured impatiently. "Well, what is it?" She swallowed. "I'm quitting." I blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "Quitting? Why on earth would you quit?" "I pay you double the market rate and provide housing." Her eyes flicked toward the hall leading to the artifact's wing. I ran out of the room. I will not stay here another night. A cold prickle crawled up my spine, though I refused to let it reach my face. Instead, I exploded. "You idiot!" I shouted, rising so abruptly my chair toppled. "Do you think I brought you here to peddle provincial ghost stories? You were hired to clean, not fabricate nonsense." She flinched, but I was too furious to stop. "You're quitting over a piece of art? A priceless artifact older than your family line? This is why I avoid hiring superstitious staff. You people see a shadow and think it's the devil." Her eyes welled with tears, but she stood her ground. "Sir, I know what I saw. I know what I heard." "Oh, enough!" I snapped. "Get out. Pack your things and leave my property before noon. I won't have hysterics poisoning my household." She turned to go, but at the doorway, she whispered without looking back, "Be careful, Mr. Grant. That armor, it wants something." Something deep inside me snarled in response. Something angry, something humiliated, something that felt dangerously close to fear. I grabbed the nearest object, a 15th century Ming vase worth nearly $60,000, and hurled it across the room. It exploded against the opposite wall in a spray of porcelain dust. The room fell silent except for my ragged breathing. I stared at the wreckage, heart thudding like an animal trapped under my ribs. I had never lost control like that. Not once, not ever. The rational part of me whispered that I was reacting to stress, to superstition infecting my household like a virus. But a darker, quieter voice suggested something else. That my outburst hadn't been entirely my own. That rage, that heat beneath my skin, that irresistible urge to destroy. It felt borrowed, invited, guided, as if something ancient and furious was whispering through the cracks of my composure. And that thought, more than Maribel's story, more than Harold's trembling, left me cold. I have always been a man of strict routines. 7 hours of sleep, black coffee, morning review of auction listings. I run my life the way I curate my collection, with precision, discipline, and order. But the night after Maribel quit, everything fell apart. Sleep came in jagged fragments. Every time I drifted off, I jolted awake, gasping, throat dry as sand. My sheets clung to my skin, soaked with sweat. The air felt too hot, too thick, as if the room itself were breathing around me. Worse were the dreams, if they even were dreams. Shadows leaning over me, horned silhouettes bending close, the metallic scrape of plates sliding against each other. Sometimes, I felt a weight on my chest, something pressing down with cold, deliberate malice. I'd wake choking on my own breath, heart slamming, but find nothing in the room, except the faint smell of heated iron. By the third night, I was sleeping in 2-hour bursts, if at all. But the morning of the fourth day was different. I woke to bright sunlight filtering through the blinds, and a burning ache deep in my ribcage. When I sat up, my breath caught in my throat, across my abdomen, my ribs, even along the inside of my arms, were dark purplish bruises in shapes I couldn't explain. They weren't the round blotches of bumping into furniture. They looked elongated, almost finger-shaped, as if someone had gripped me with enormous, inhuman hands. I ran my fingers over them. They were tender, hot to the touch. What the hell? I don't bruise easily. I work out, I eat well, and I've survived a dozen archaeological dives where rocks and equipment tried their best to kill me. But these bruises looked deliberate, patterned, like I'd been handled. By what? Or more horrifyingly, by whom? For the first time in days, genuine fear slid ice-cold down my spine. I grabbed my keys with shaking fingers and drove straight to my doctor's private clinic. He's been my physician for years, a calm, meticulous man named Dr. Levins. He examined the bruises, took blood, checked for infections or toxins. I waited in the private lounge, my nerves buzzing like exposed wires. Sweat prickled my skin despite the air conditioning. When Levins finally returned, holding a clipboard, he looked mildly confused, but not alarmed. "Well," he said slowly, "your blood work is pristine. No signs of clotting disorders, no infections, no inflammation markers. Your vitals are perfectly normal." I stared at him. "Then what caused these?" He gave a helpless little shrug. "Bruises happen. You could have knocked into something while sleepwalking." "I don't sleepwalk. Stress can affect the body in strange ways," he said gently. "And you look exhausted." "I haven't slept properly in days," I muttered. He nodded sympathetically. "Nervous exhaustion, then. Your mind may be playing tricks on your memory. You could have injured yourself and simply not remembered it." The thought irritated me more than comforted me. He scribbled something on a pad and tore off the sheet. "I'll prescribe you a mild sedative. Take it before bed for 3 nights. Try not to overwork yourself." Overwork, sleep deprivation, stress. Clinical labels for something that felt far more sinister. I left the clinic with the prescription paper crumpled in my fist, the bruises throbbing under my shirt like a reminder that no amount of rationalization could explain them away. As I walked back to my car, I caught my reflection in the tinted window. For a fleeting moment, just a blink, I could have sworn something stood behind me in the reflection. Something tall, dark, bristling with curved horns. I spun around, nothing. The parking lot was empty, sunlight glaring off the asphalt. But the reflection, whether hallucination or glimpse, left my stomach clenched. My pulse pounded erratically. Maybe the doctor was right. Maybe I was exhausted. That night, for the first time in many days, I finally slipped into a deep, unbroken sleep. It wasn't restful. My dreams churned with feverish flashes of red silk, steel plates, and the muffled thud of footsteps behind paper doors. But it was deep enough that I sank for hours, floating in a thick blackness that felt almost medicinal. So, when I was suddenly torn out of it, ripped upward toward consciousness, it was as if an icy hand had clamped down around my throat and yanked. The sound that woke me was not a crash or even a footstep. It was a whisper, a sharply articulated, intentionally enunciated whisper. It drew out my name with a strange, deliberate delicacy. as though someone were savoring each syllable, testing it on their tongue. Dexter. My heart rammed against his ribs. For a moment, I couldn't tell whether I'd truly heard the voice or whether my mind, already thin and fraying from lack of sleep, had manufactured it. But the lingering vibration of it, the sense of breath grazing right beside my ear, felt too real, too physical. I swung my legs off the bed and stood, the carpet cool under my bare feet. A faint dizziness washed over me. My body still weak, still marked by those strange purple bruises I had noticed that morning. I steadied myself against the nightstand and forced my breathing into something resembling control. "Harold?" I called out into the dark, though I knew immediately that the whisper didn't belong to my security guard. Harold had a gruff, straightforward manner of speaking. He certainly didn't whisper anyone's name like that. Receiving no answer, I grabbed a robe from the edge of the bed and shrugged it on, then stepped into the hallway. The sensors embedded in the ceiling lights flickered to life as I moved, casting long, thin beams that stretched across the corridor like pale fingers. I walked slowly, listening intently. Each creak of the old mansion's structure sounded amplified, like the bones of the house shifting in discomfort. I searched the east wing first, Harold's usual patrol route. The doors were closed, untouched, the windows locked. My own footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the empty halls. A growing, almost childish irritation tugged at me. Harold should have been here. Always steady, always reliable. I paid him handsomely to be so. I descended the staircase to the ground floor, my breathing growing shallow. I checked the kitchen, the main hall, the billiard room. No sign of Harold. No response to repeated calls of his name. Growing frustrated and increasingly uneasy, I finally headed toward the Japanese artifact room. The corridor leading to it felt colder somehow, as though the air had thinned. When I reached the sliding wooden doors, I hesitated. A faint metallic smell reached me, subtle but undeniable, like iron left out in the rain. I swallowed hard and pushed the door open, my breath caught in my throat. The crimson armor stood exactly where it always had, gleaming under the soft recessed lights. But it was no longer pristine, no longer immaculate. Across the lacquered plates of the cuirass and along the segmented arm guards, something dark and glistening had been splattered in jagged streaks. The droplets shone wetly, slow and viscous, trickling down in thin, sinuous rivulets. Crimson. Dark, too similar to blood to dismiss. The floor around the armor was worse. Spots of the same thick liquid scattered in an irregular pattern, as if something had been dragged or shaken violently. I just stared, unable to move. My mouth had gone dry. My heart thudded stiffly against his ribs. For one awful moment, an image burst into my mind unbidden. Harold, reaching out to the armor just as the maid had described. I barked out a laugh. A loud, hysterical, discordant laugh that echoed sharply off the glass displays. The sound felt foreign even to me, as if someone else were laughing through my throat. "No, absolutely not," I muttered, my voice trembling between fear and fury. "This is ridiculous. Completely ridiculous." I forced myself to step closer, leaning over the reddish stains, my stomach twisting. Up close, the smell grew stronger, metallic, coppery. "This is a joke," I insisted, louder now, as though volume made my interpretation more legitimate. "A setup, a prank." My hands clenched. "Harold did this?" I declared, the explanation forming itself out of desperation. "He must have splashed some paint around, tried to frighten me, then ran off like a coward? Fine, fine. Let him quit. Let him disappear. I'll have his contract terminated and garnish every remaining payment." I was babbling but couldn't seem to stop. "Yes, that's exactly what this is. A stupid stunt." He got nervous about his job and bolted. I looked again at the crimson armor. The lacquered plates gleamed. Their expressionless Menpo mask seemed somehow satisfied, almost contemplative. I shuddered, but forced myself to laugh again. Sharp, brittle cracking at the edges. "Blood, right? As if." My voice echoed around the room, but nothing answered. The stains continued to glisten in the silence. The next morning, I tried to ground myself in routine. I barricaded my mind behind the familiar rhythm of work. Emails, negotiations on another valuable artifact, financial reports, the comforting tyranny of numbers. My office, with its heavy oak desk and tidy rows of books, had always been the one place in this entire mansion where I felt in control. I sat there with a cup of coffee cooling beside me, convincing myself that the night before had been nothing more than an overgrown hallucination brought on by stress, and that infuriating sedative the doctor insisted I take. I had just signed a contract when my phone, lying face down on the desk, buzzed, but the sound that filled the room wasn't my ringtone. It wasn't even remotely close. Deep resonant war drums thundered through the air. Slow at first, like the heartbeat of some colossal beast awakening from centuries of slumber. The vibrations shuddered through the floorboards, rattling the glass panes of the windows. My coffee cup trembled, the surface of the liquid rippling as if disturbed by distant explosions. I stared at the phone, frozen. The screen showed an unknown number, but the drums, those were coming from the phone, weren't they? They had to be. Where else? The beating grew louder, more insistent and faster. I snatched the phone up with shaking fingers and hit decline. But the drums did not stop. In fact, they swelled, expanded, pressed in from all directions, as though the room itself had thickened with them. My ears rang, my chest constricted. I pressed the phone against the desk, then held it away, then yanked open the drawer as if I might stuff the sound inside and smother it. Nothing changed. The drums roared on, and then the visions began. At first, they flickered at the corner of my sight. Tiny bursts of red and steel. Then, my head grew heavy, my vision warping, the edges of the room sinking into a deep bleeding haze. Suddenly, I wasn't in my office anymore. Not entirely. The walls dissolved like wet ink. The floor vanished beneath me. The air thickened with smoke and the stench of burning wood. Through the smoke, I saw a battlefield, bodies. Mangled, broken bodies stretched across a blood-soaked plain. Crows circling, screams, short, gurgling, human and animal alike. I saw men crawling through mud, reaching for severed limbs, calling out for help that wouldn't come. And at the center of it all, the Crimson Samurai. The armor was unmistakable, gleaming even through grime and gore, lacquer red as fresh wounds. Its mask twisted in a perpetual snarl, the jaw carved to resemble a demon's fanged grin. It moved with terrifying precision, as though the plates of armor were not metal but extensions of its own flesh. The warrior hacked down one man, then pivoted with fluid grace to behead another. The blade whistled, elegant, almost musical. Heads rolled, arteries sprayed. The warrior's footsteps left steaming red prints across the ground. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. More flashes. Villages burning, women dragged screaming from huts. A man cleaved from shoulder to hip with a single swing. The samurai lifted a spear impaling an enemy soldier and used the skewered man as a shield while arrows rained down like blackened hail. The drums reached a fever pitch, so loud they cracked through my skull like lightning splitting stone. I gasped, clutching my head. Make it stop! Make it stop! But the images only intensified. The Crimson Warrior turned slowly toward me, as though finally aware of being watched. Blood dripped from the tip of his blade. Smoke curled around him like a living serpent. He took one step toward me, then another. Everything spun violently. My knees buckled. The desk surged upward, or maybe I was falling. My vision broke apart into shattering shards of red and black. I hit the floor. The war drums kept pounding, pounding. I think I screamed. I think someone, maybe me, maybe the samurai, let out a raw guttural howl that scraped the inside of my skull. And then, a deep, silent, hungry darkness swallowed me whole. I came to on the hardwood floor of my office, face down, cheek pressed against the cool oak boards. For a moment I couldn't remember why I was there, or even where there was. My thoughts were thick, drifting like smoke through a broken temple. When I pushed myself up, the room tilted, and a sharp sting radiated through my forehead. I touched under my nose. My fingertips came away rusty red, blood, dried, cracked at the edges, but unmistakably mine. A thin trail of it had dribbled from my nostril, dried into a dark smear that flaked off when I swiped at it. I stared at the stain on my fingers and felt an animal shiver run through me. This wasn't just tiredness. This wasn't something a sedative could explain away. But I needed it anyway. I stumbled to my desk drawer, the one where I'd tossed the little amber pill bottle without even reading the instructions properly. My hands trembled as I opened it. The pills rattled like trapped teeth. I didn't think, didn't care. I swallowed two at once, dry, feeling them scrape down my throat like gravel. I gripped the desk until the trembling dulled to something manageable. Calm down, Dexter. Your mind is playing tricks on you. But the war drums still faintly echoed in my skull. Phantom reverberations, like my brain was still vibrating from the sound. I crawled into bed sometime before noon, wearing my shoes, still in yesterday's shirt. I didn't even close the curtains. I just collapsed face first, letting the mattress swallow me whole. And quickly, too quickly, the sedatives dragged me under. It began as darkness, not the peaceful kind, but the thick, choking, viscous sort that feels alive around you. A tar-like black that pressed against my skin. I realized, with the sharp jolt of terror, that I couldn't move. Not a finger, not an eyelid, not a breath beyond shallow, involuntary gasps. My body lay pinned, stretched across the bed like a corpse arranged for display. And yet my mind was burning awake. Over-aware, hyper-focused, listening to every creak of the house. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might break a rib. At that moment, I felt it. Not a shift in the air. No, it was a presence. Heavy, deliberate, hateful. Something stood in the room with me. The darkness thickened in one spot near the foot of the bed, like soot swirling into a shape. Agonizingly slowly, it assembled itself into a silhouette. A towering figure, 7 feet at least, with a pair of long curved horns that spread from its head like the ridges of some monstrous crown. Its skin was charred black, cracked like cooled volcanic rock, but beneath the cracks glowed faint veins of ember red, pulsing as if its blood were molten metal. Each breath it exhaled came out in a low rumble, vibrating the air, making the shadows tremble. And I couldn't even blink. The creature tilted its head in curiosity. A long, jagged crack split across its face, revealing a flash of crimson light deep inside. Its version of a grin or hunger. Its elongated skeletal hands dragged toward me, claws so long they curved like sickles. As it stepped forward, the floorboards beneath it groaned with the sound of metal scraping stone. I tried to scream. My throat refused to obey. The claws hovered over my chest, twitching, like they were deciding where to enter, whether to crush my ribs or peel them apart like a lacquered box. The creature leaned closer, darkness swirling around its form like a cloak of smoke. Heat radiated off it in waves. My skin burned just from proximity. I could smell ash, blood, burnt wood. Then I saw its eyes, twin spheres of molten red, glowing from deep within the cracked mask of its face. I understood who this was, the Oni of the red armor Akuma Jinsai, the demon warrior who had slaughtered monks, razed temples, carried out horrors unspeakable. The warlord whose cursed soul was trapped in the armor now displayed in my home like a decorative trophy. He had come for me. His claws pressed against my sternum, a coldness cutting through the heat, as though death itself had touched bone. I felt pressure, an unbearable tightening, as if he were deciding whether to drag my soul out of my body. Suddenly, a thin ray of gold broke through the curtains as the sun edged over the horizon. It fell directly across the Oni's body. The demon reeled back with a guttural snarl, its claws retracting instantly. Its form flickered, destabilizing at the edges. Cracks widened, scattering embers across the room. It stumbled backward as if struck, then dissolved into shadow, vanishing so abruptly it left the smell of smoldering iron behind. My body snapped free. I gasped, violently, desperately, clutching my chest. Tears I hadn't felt, dripping pooled at the corners of my eyes. I lay there as sunlight slowly filled the room. I was afraid to even look at the door. Now I knew, beyond all doubt, that the armor in the other room wasn't an artifact. It was alive and it wanted me. I spent almost an hour convincing myself that daylight meant safety. But beneath every strained breath, beneath every rationalization, one certainty pulsed like a migraine. The Oni had touched my chest. I could still feel the phantom cold of its claws pressed against my sternum. I dressed mechanically, threw water on my face, and forced my legs to carry me down the corridor toward the Japanese artifact room. I had a plan. Sloppy, desperate, but a plan nonetheless. Throw the armor out, burn it, bury it, dump it off my cliff into the ocean. Anything to get it out of this house. Whatever spiritual entity was attached to it, I would sever ties with it the only way I knew how. I was Dexter Grant. I had thrown ancient idols into bonfires before when they failed to authenticate. I would destroy this armor if that's what it took. But as I approached the double doors to the Japanese artifact room, my heart began pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through my throat. The doors were slightly ajar. I never left them ajar. I pushed them open, the hinges crying out, and the air inside the room felt unnaturally cold, as if every window had been opened during a blizzard. I stepped inside, already bracing for the overwhelming crimson presence. But the pedestal was empty. The armor was gone. Every part of me, every last illusion of logic, collapsed. No, where is it? Where is it? I muttered, opening display cases, scanning corners like the armor might simply be hiding behind a scroll or wedged under a stand. The emptiness of the pedestal mocked me, a blank stage where a monster had stood. The room seemed to tighten around me, shadows overlapping until they felt heavy, deliberate. Then the whispering began. Not from one direction, not from one voice. Dexter Grant. Come, look at me. My name drifted through the air like smoke, layered, multiplied. Male, female, old, young. Voices overlapping as if entire centuries of the dead were calling to me. I spun around, back pressed against a lacquered cabinet, chest heaving. The shadows stretched along the walls, slowly, unnaturally, as though they were pulling horns out of themselves. Thin pointed silhouettes rose from every corner, growing taller, broader, forming shapes too similar to the Onis to dismiss as tricks of the light. The overhead fixtures flickered. One by one, the shadows elongated toward me. I slipped out of the room, half stumbling, half sliding, slamming the doors shut behind me. The corridor outside was narrow, lined with portraits of historical figures I once admired. Their eyes, in that moment, felt accusatory. I clutched the wall, forcing myself to breathe through the spiraling panic. But my mansion was no longer a house. It was a corridor of shifting dark, each doorway yawning wider, each sconce dimming, as though something were sucking the light into its lungs. And at the far end of the hall, near the large mirror I'd imported from Kyoto decades ago, something stood. Crimson, sharp, rigid and silent. The samurai armor. Its lacquered plates gleamed unnaturally bright, as though freshly polished. Blood-red cord bindings hung like torn ligaments. The kabuto helmet, crowned with its wicked horns, was angled toward me, though there was no face behind it. No stand, no hook, no body. Just upright, balanced, impossibly held up by something unseen. I froze, my breath turning shallow and desperate. The armor didn't move at first. It simply existed in that unnaturally still way that makes the world around it feel wrong. Like reality itself is bending to accommodate its presence. Then its right gauntlet, heavy, metal-plated, still smeared with dried crimson, lifted a few inches, slowly and deliberately, beckoning. A gesture older than language, older than culture. Unmistakably the universal motion of "come here." I took a step backward, instinct overriding reason. The armor took a step forward. A single echoing clank reverberated through the hallway. My teeth rattled. The whispering returned. This time hissed directly into my ear despite the armor being 30 feet away. Come to me, Dexter. Obey the oath you never made. My legs nearly gave out, and cold sweat coated my palms. Every part of me screamed to run, to flee my own mansion like a terrified child. I backed further away, pulse hammering. The armor lifted its other gauntlet, beckoning again, patient, inevitable, predatory. The Oni was done warning me. It wanted me to submit, it wanted me to wear it. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was no longer the master of anything I owned. The armor didn't walk toward me again. It charged. One instant it stood by the mirror, gauntlets raised in silent invitation. And in the next, the corridor exploded with the sound of metal slamming against hardwood as the crimson plates hurtled forward with inhuman speed. I stumbled backward with a strangled cry, barely dodging as the armor's plated shoulder smashed into the wall where I had stood. Plaster burst like bone under a hammer. A jagged crack ran halfway up the hallway. The armor turned its empty helmet toward me. That deliberate animal slow pivot, metal creaking like a rusted gate to hell. I ran, my mind blank, my lungs burning. I sprinted down the corridor, every footstep punctuated by the thunderous clank of armored footsteps gaining on me. The plates rattled violently, each impact a promise of what it would do to my ribcage if it caught me. "Stop!" I shouted. A pathetic reflexive cry, voice breaking like glass. The armor did not stop. I reached a corner too fast and slammed into the wall, stars shooting across my vision. Before I could recover, something cold and powerful wrapped around my wrist, metal fingers clamping down with crushing force. I screamed and twisted away, but the grip tightened until my bones felt like they might splinter. It yanked me toward itself with terrifying strength. My shoulder popped, my breath leaving me in a shocked gasp. The armor's free hand rose, gauntlet extended, and pressed against my chest. The world dimmed. Somewhere beneath the metal plates, beneath the lacquer and the cords and the centuries of silence, I felt another hand. Something fleshless and enormous. The Oni. It was trying to force the gauntlet onto my arm. "No, get off. Get off me!" I thrashed wildly, but fighting a supernatural warlord is like fighting a landslide. My heels scraped uselessly across the floor as the armor dragged me toward it, positioning my arm to slide into the gauntlet. "Obey the oath you never swore," the whispered voices hissed in my ear. "No, I won't." The gauntlet began sliding up my forearm all on its own. My skin burned, scalding heat flooding through the metal and into my veins. I felt rage, blind, murderous rage, pouring into me like a poison. And then the mirror. The armor had dragged me close enough that I could see both of us reflected in its surface. And in the mirror, I wasn't alone with the armor. I saw him, a towering, horned figure, skin like cracked volcanic stone, eyes burning with molten hate, standing exactly where the armor stood in reality. More than 7 feet tall, teeth long enough to pierce a man's skull, a jaw unhinged in an eternal silent scream. The Oni moved in perfect sync with the empty suit, every jerking motion an echo of its rage centuries deep. It was watching me with a hunger so ancient it made my organs twist. The shock broke something loose in me. I twisted violently, smashing my shoulder against the armor's plates. Pain sparked down my arm, but the gauntlet slipped just enough for me to wrench free. The Oni roared, silent in the world, deafening in the mirror. I stumbled backward, grabbed the nearest object, a small ebony statue, and hurled it at the mirror. Crystal erupted outward in a shower of glittering shards. The Oni's reflection fractured into 100 horned pieces before disappearing entirely. The armor staggered, just for a moment, just long enough. I ran again, this time toward the west wing, toward the heavy steel door of my panic room. The armor's footsteps followed, louder, faster, unrelenting. A metal-plated hand raked across my back, slicing fabric and grazing skin. I reached the panic room door, slapped the control panel, and rushed out of the room at the last moment. The locking mechanism engaged just as the armor swung its katana. The blade sliced across my shoulder as the door slammed shut. White-hot agony tore through me. I screamed, slumping against the cold steel. Blood soaked my shirt in seconds, dripping onto the floor in thick, uneven splatters. On the other side of the door, the armor struck again and again, the clangs echoing like a siege battering ram. Each blow made the entire room tremble. I don't remember dialing 911. My hands were shaking too hard, and I kept smearing blood across the touchscreen every time my thumb slipped. When the dispatcher finally answered, all I managed to say were scraps. Help, attack, bleeding, armor, demon. A frantic jumble no sane person would take seriously. I didn't wait for the cops. I didn't dare stay inside the house. I stumbled out through the front doors, clutching my shoulder, the warm seep of blood soaking through my shirt. The world tilted around me as I reached the street corner and pressed my back to a cold street lamp. My legs gave out and I slid down until I was sitting on the curb, gasping. Minutes later, red and blue light exploded across the quiet neighborhood. Patrol cars screeched in, then a SWAT truck. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, voices sharp and clipped. One of them knelt beside me. "Sir, you're injured. Stay still." "It's in the house," I whispered. "The armor, it attacked me." I sounded insane. I was insane. Who else says something like that? "SWAT, move!" someone barked. I watched them rush into the house that I had just fled like it was burning down behind me. The minutes dragged by, each one stretching thinner than the last. I kept expecting a scream from inside, gunshots, anything, but there was only silence, punctuated by muffled radio chatter. Finally, the SWAT commander stepped back outside and approached me. "House is clear," he said, like a mechanic reporting a routine inspection. "That's impossible," I croaked. My throat felt raw. "Check the panic room." "I trapped it. I locked it inside." "We did check," he said. His expression softened into something between pity and annoyance. "There's nothing in there." I forced myself to my feet, ignoring how dizzy I felt. "Show me." Inside, the place looked like a war zone. Broken artifacts, slashed walls, shattered pieces of furniture. It was all there, the evidence that something had happened, something violent. But the panic room, the sight of it nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. The reinforced steel door, designed to withstand anything short of a tank shell, was bent outward. Not smashed with tools, not pried open, bent, as if something inside had simply pushed through. And behind the ruined door was worse. A jagged hole torn into the interior wall of the panic room. Reinforced concrete shredded like drywall. What made that?" I heard myself ask. "No idea," the commander said. "It doesn't match any tool marks. No explosives, no residue. Nothing we recognize." He turned his flashlight on me. "You said someone in armor attacked you, but we found no armor. No weapons, no footprints, no sign of forced entry." My face burned with humiliation. "It moved," I said quietly. "The armor moved. It chased me. It had a sword. I shut my mouth as I realized how I sounded. The cops exchanged another round of skeptical, frustrated looks. One officer muttered under his breath, "Guy probably tripped over his own decor." Another said, "Or someone tried to rob him and he's too freaked out to remember straight." I felt humiliation burn in my throat. "I'm not crazy." "We're not saying you are," the commanding officer answered, voice gentle. "Just let the EMT take you to the hospital. Shock can mess with memory. Shock, hallucinations." The words stuck to him like leeches. I refused the ambulance, but let them patch the wound. I just wanted to get away. From the house, from the hole in the wall, from the pitying stares. I left that night. By the next morning, I was already in Seattle. A last-minute flight, a penthouse suite paid for in desperation, and a security team hired without negotiation. I wanted bodies around me. I wanted locked doors. I wanted to believe the Oni, or whatever the hell it was, had boundaries. It didn't help. For 2 days, I barely slept. Every shadow in the hotel room seemed too dark. Every reflective surface made my stomach twist. I kept the lights on. I told the security team to check the hallway every 30 minutes. On the third night, exhausted and shaking, I sat in the temporary office I'd set up in the suite. I wanted something normal, something grounding. Music, I thought. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, leaned back in the chair, and hit play. A low, heavy thump hit my ears. I frowned. Wrong playlist. I tapped pause. The thump grew louder. Another beat followed, then another. Slow, resonant, like a massive drum being struck from very far away. My heartbeat staggered. It was a war drum, something else layered beneath it. Metal scraping against stone, like a blade being dragged across the floor. I tore the headphones off and threw them across the room. But even after they left my ears, he could still hear the drums faintly echoing, as if they were coming from the walls, or from somewhere behind me.